I know, this is the,
I like that.
yeah, so, I can't take credit for it. It's somebody else's idea, but it's working. All right, we can go live.
We're live on the YouTube.
All righty. Welcome, everybody. It's Wednesday, March 19th, and you have reached the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. And we are here this morning starting our deep learning journey and taking some testimony related to H289. So we will go around the table and introduce ourselves and then ask our guests to introduce themselves. And then we'll turn it over to teaching. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from the Bennington 4 District.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury, County, Essex.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southwood, Caledonia 2. Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Thuppner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Thomas Weiss, Resident of Montpelier.
You, Thomas?
Will Brosnan, Chamber of Commerce.
I'm Michelle Boomhead with the Agency of Transportation.
Great.
Bailey Gutlick. I'm interning for Representative Molly Berg.
All righty. Okay, for the record.
For the record, I am TJ Poor. I'm the Director of Regulated Utility Planning at the Public Service Department. Thank you for having me back. It's been a couple of weeks. Thank you all. Still waiting for
Round 5.
Still waiting for my mug.
They've been
Oh.
ordered. I ran into a crossover problem with shipping and being out of town. Truly, it's actually happening.
Wow.
Yeah.
Excellent.
On the record.
I
Yeah,
am
it's on the
legitimately excited for that. Okay, so thanks for having me back. So today, what I am going to, or I plan to do, is provide an introduction and overview of the comprehensive energy plan. I'll cover the statutory basis for the plan and some of the basics around it, how it relates to the climate action plan, and where it overlaps and does not overlap, and kind of go into some of the modeling backbone, how the state thinks about making decisions as it relates to the comprehensive energy plan and the process that we undertook. And then I'll get into like the structure of the plan itself and actual recommendations coming from the plan, just a high level overview. I'm sorry, I almost forgot. If you do have copies of the executive summary of the plan for you all.
Right.
And pass that around. That is also available on our website. And I can send a link for posting after. I grabbed these on the way out this morning. And then, to the extent there's time, hopefully there'll be time, I'll end with some comments on how, the H289 and the comprehensive energy plan interweave, overlap, relate to each other.
That is awesome. We have until we're getting better at managing our time. Our next witness is not until 10:30.
Okay, great.
So because it was you, I knew to add, we allow plenty of time.
Great.
So we're not in a rush and we can ask plenty of questions and.
Thank you. And please do ask questions as we go. And I think that that would be perfect. Also, because it was you, I managed the number of slides that I have. Maybe we'll end early. We both if we overcorrected. So, okay. So just to get started, real overview of the plan. Well, Section 202B of Title 30 is the statutory basis for the plan. It is what requires us and directs us to actually complete it. It occurs every 6 years. That was a change in the last decade. It was for a while, it was not on a regular time frame, and then it was every 5 years, and then those 5 years ultimately required a published plan in January, 2 months after an election. So they put it on an off-election cycle so that there would be it would be published in a year that there was some stability and consistency with whoever was in charge. The really the way we think about it is, it is the administration that does this plan, and that Vermonters choose the priorities they place in the energy plan at the time through elections. Another reason for that. Governor Scott's priorities, as you probably have heard over the years: affordability, protecting the most vulnerable Vermonters, and economic development. They all are kind of interwoven into the plan, and really a starting point for how recommendations are developed. I'll get into that a little more. In addition, there are some specific requirements in the plan. It needs to provide a forecast of demand, supply, cost, and environmental effects of different energy sources. It must be consistent with our greenhouse gas requirements and the climate action plan. And we also provide guidance as a part of this plan for utilities in scoping their own integrated resource plans for electric utilities. And in it was Act 174 of 2016, which required or allowed regional planning commissions to put out regional plans so that they could have some say in the siting process and get with electric generation siting in towns and regions. And so if they put out a plan pursuant to guidelines we publish as part of the energy plan, then they can have what's called substantial deference in utility proceedings related to the siting of generation in the area. And then,
Question here.
Teacher,
oh yeah,
sorry. Before you move on, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. I know I could look this up right now, but I'm sure you know. So Title 30, Section 202B, I assume that's a section of statute that just lays out exactly what the plan is.
right.
And Section 202, overarching, is that the renewable? That's the renewable energy section, right? Just trying to figure out what
Section 202 in general is public service.
public. Oh, okay.
So
So
it's-
202 is public service in general.
Right.
202B lays out what the comprehensive energy plan is. And what's 202A?
Good question.
Are we getting
That
there?
is the next slide.
Oh,
Yes, yeah,
Okay, onward.
right. And so 202B says, the last line on this slide, it must seek to implement state energy policy as set forth in 202A. And 202A should look a little familiar to you. I showed you a slide with this slide probably on one of the first times I was in, and really it lays out the state's state energy policy. And these are the bold is mine, but it really lays out the competing interests that need to be balanced in our state energy policy. And we at the Public Service Department really take this statute to heart. In the planning division, this is kind of the foundation of what we build all of our programs and policies on. So it's reliable and secure and sustainable energy delivery. It's affordable, encourages the state's economic vitality. It's efficient, it's cost effective, and it meets our greenhouse gas reduction requirements. Those things, as I've mentioned previously, are sometimes in conflict, and the energy plan needs to balance those competing priorities to put forth a plan that is in the interest of the state and meets with the administration's priorities. For a while, I think it was up on your board, like the statute, I remember it up there. And maybe not. Maybe it's just the affordability that I remember there. But so I add this slide on least cost planning. This is really related to electric utilities, but I add it for two reasons. One, the energy plan is also the state's electric plan. There used to be two separate documents. Some 20 or 30 years ago, we combined them into one document because our different sectors are obviously interrelated. And it's hard to think about energy use without thinking about electricity use. So I put this slide in here because this is the slide that requires our electric utilities to do least cost planning in their integrated resource plans. And what I think about the comprehensive energy plan a little bit like an integrated resource plan for the state, and that we need to really consider all of the variables and the different possibilities and the impacts of our policy choices, business as usual or doing nothing versus taking action, and what the different uncertainties and risks are as we go forward, and make sure we have a good decision-making framework in order to move forward and make policy. And really, the bolded here is lowest present value life cycle cost. So for the life of measures, we're not looking at year one, we're looking at over time, including environmental and economic costs. And that phrase has been really key over the decades in Vermont, including environmental and economic costs. It's what really allowed us and our planning decades ago to start including cost of carbon impact, particularly with our energy efficiency utilities, but also our electric utilities, and then more broadly the energy plan. And then we have the plan also requires, again, consistency with greenhouse gas reduction requirements, evaluating the financial risks associated with greenhouse gas emissions, and then consistency with renewable energy goals in the state.
How do you guys value
Oh, yeah, exactly.
the financial risk? You guys have models that can do that fairly.
So there's a couple of ways. One, we use the social cost of carbon, which is an assessment of the potential damages from climate change. As we go forward, and I'll talk about this a little more as it's a theme of the energy plan, but really figuring out how to value resilience and reliability of our grid is a work in progress. And I'm going to hold on that as I talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does the plan overlap with the climate action plan? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, the energy plan, the lead responsibility for that plan is with the administration. And the climate action plan, the lead responsibility is the Climate Council, who is appointed and elected citizens that are appointed to that council. Timing wise, the energy plan, as I said, is every 6 years. The climate action plan is every 4 years to be updated. That they were being done at the same time the last time this came out. So we had a draft energy plan come out in October, a draft climate action plan come out in November. And then the final climate action plan was December, and the final energy plan was in January. And so, they really interweaved and overlapped. That had pros and cons to it, right? That on the plus side, we could use a lot of the same resources, some of the same engagement efforts, some of the and the same modeling, which I'll talk about in a moment. On the downside, that there was lots of time and energy, and there's some even confusion from potentially the general public or even stakeholders who, we have two different leads for the two different plans, and that created some challenges. And this all happened during kind of fully remote COVID stage. So more challenges there as well. Substantively, there is a lot of overlap with the plans, so doing them at the same time had some benefits there as well, in that they both need to be directed to meeting our greenhouse gas reduction requirements. They both have energy sector analysis, including policy and technology scenarios and different pathways. They both have, as I mentioned, public engagement and modeling efforts, and both were focused on equitable transitions. And I think one of the really useful things for the department was the creation of the Just Transition Subcommittee of the Climate Council. That really informed our thinking in what turned into one of the themes of the energy plan of equity and environmental justice. Now, the climate action plan, you'll hear a lot more later this morning from Agency of Natural Resources. Things that it covers that the energy plan doesn't is climate adaptation, some of the non-energy greenhouse gas emissions like agriculture and waste, sequestration of energy in our lands and land use, and specifically a review of the greenhouse gas inventory and how we track emissions. On the energy plan side, cost effectiveness is a focus. That is not a focus that is not included in the climate action plan. And it is a focus of the comprehensive energy plan. More specifics on renewable energy development and electric planning, including reliability and that integrated resource plan guidance I mentioned. When we speak to energy system planning, we're looking at adequacy of supply. We have a section on the electric supply, for example, our regional infrastructure and how we interact as part of the ISO New England region. Affordability, economic vitality, those tenets of 202A that I talked about earlier. And then those standards for local planning that are part of the plan and that Act 174 of 2016. I will mention, and Jane and Secretary Moore can talk further about the 2025 Climate Action Plan update, but it is going to speak to state hazard mitigation plan and resilience implementation strategy. So there are some more pieces that are on kind of the right side of this chart here, energy plan, that are also going to be in the climate action plan in terms of resilience. So I'll take a moment to talk about the modeling that has been done for both the plans. And this was a synergy that we early on in the process realized that it would be problematic if we had two different models with these two different plans on how the energy system works. So the energy plan was kind of started first, I guess, in its planning and work, and we decided on using the low emissions analysis platform, which is really, I'm not going to go through that chart there, that flow chart, but it's really what's called an input-output model. So it's an accounting framework that allows you to decide on what inputs you think are going to happen in a business as usual. You enter that, and then you create policy scenarios and say, we think there's going to be this many weatherization jobs done under our policies and this many heat pumps, this many electric vehicles installed. And it has cost parameters and emissions parameters in there. It will account for interactive effects, like a home that is weatherized and has a heat pump, right? You can't double count all of those savings, even though there will be savings from both of those measures. And so it counts for those interactive effects and then outputs what the resulting energy usage and emissions will be. We chose this model partly because of our experience with the previous energy plan in 2016, where we used something called the Times-Markel model. It was built and operated by a consultant, and it was a really cool model. Had all kinds of fancy outputs. You could tell the consultant to kind of pull some levers, and they would pull them, and then out would spit different results and a lot of interesting information. But it was really a black box. It was really us needing to tell the consultant to do something and run that model. I think the number one benefit of this model was that it is very transparent and the model is available. You can actually download the structure of it online. Anybody can. You do need to, and trainings are available to kind of understand it. You can start with a spreadsheet and then you can get into the actual specifics of the model.
I have a couple questions. Sorry if I missed this. The LEAP model or approach, is that a model that's specific to energy work, or is it some sort of national standard that you can use LEAP to do modeling around other fields? Or
It's energy and emissions.
Okay.
And so it's pretty widely used. There's a lot of jurisdictions out there that use this. It was developed by an organization called the Stockholm Environment Institute, and who is also locally, just in Sweden, but and local as in New England. They have their main U.S. offices in Boston area, and it is. It really is, it started as emissions focused, and then so it really captures it can capture the agricultural sector as well, biomass, and then energy obviously is a main component of our emissions. So it captures kind of the building stock and inputs and outputs of those types of measures that affect our building stock and our transportation as well.
I have more questions. And does it capture or account for sequestration?
Yes, I think I'm going to say yes, and then I'm going to defer that question to the Agency of Natural Resources for specifics.
Okay. And then I'm sorry, this slide definitely is interesting to me. So what I'm seeing on the demand graph is that we're seeing, or we're anticipating, sort of flat, maybe slightly declining demand in industrial, pretty flat for commercial, not a whole lot of some increasing demand expected in residential, and then a lot of demand expected in transportation, rising demand. So this is basically showing where we expect to be making progress towards electrification, right?
Yeah.
Am I misreading?
No, I think that's a reasonable way to frame it. This is just one example output of the model, and this is the electricity demand output. And so you can see that electricity demand, it was estimated to roughly double from 2020 to 2050 at the time. I think we would, if in an updated model, it would be slightly lower than that, actually.
Okay.
But it is, and this is a slide from a couple of years ago. The model is being continued to use and updated. Sure. But right, I think it's a reasonable conclusion. We will be using much more electricity demand than we are now, and is what this says. And the biggest increases come from the electric sector, from obviously electric vehicles, or the transportation sector from electric vehicles.
Rep Campbell had his hand up first. Yeah.
Are the models, the LEAP models that the department has been using available to look at or download?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're on your record somewhere.
Not very sensitive. Sorry about that. As this is these two plans have evolved, the department was the lead modeler for the energy plan and the first climate action plan. And in updating over time, A&R has taken the lead in updating. So you'll see reports and plans from A&R, and the model, the structure, what you need to do is download the structure of the model, and then there are files that are available from the state in order to load those into kind of the application, and then you can play with that application.
Oh, interesting. Okay, great. And I assume that it works with updated versions of the leaked model. I see there's an updated version that just
Right.
was posted a couple days ago.
Yes, they should work. Definitely.
Thank you, James Zorchek. And I'll just say that we just spent substantial money and time converting our LEAP platform model to the most up-to-date version.
Oh.
So it's not as simple as like updating it. We actually had a consultant move our business as usual model and our scenario planning in service of doing updates for this climate action plan into the latest model.
Okay.
So, and we maintain 6 licenses that we share between Public Service Department and the agency, so that we can all use it for the benefit of both planning, and then TJ staff also uses it to work with RPCs and others for more localized downscaling of the data.
Thanks.
I saw another hand. Was it civilian? Chris, I'm sorry, Marl.
Yeah, 2 questions. One, how is energy efficiency gains? Is that captured in this model somewhere?
Yes. Yeah.
So like the transition from light bulbs to LEDs, that would have shown up somewhere in here, but gotten negated by increasing demand in other sectors.
Correct. Yeah, that particular example would have been in the baseline already, and then we have an estimate of our current end use efficiency in our electric sector that informs our electric demand forecast, and that all includes our efficiency programs. So if we change kind of our efficiency program investments, for example, reallocated the money elsewhere, then this forecast would have to go up because we have assumed them in that forecast.
And so I know it's only 2 years or 2.5 years of full, but have you been able to assess whether your original modeling was accurate based on real data?
One thing that we all like to say, I think Secretary Moore says a lot as well, is that all these models are wrong. Right. Some of the models are useful. So I think what we would find is that for example, for our electric sector consumption, as I mentioned, that they're a little high. We're doing a separate study on heat pump consumption and for ductless mini split heat pumps, and finding that they are not used in the winter as much as you would think. They're being used more for cooling, and as a result, the actual usage is less than we forecasted. So in updating this, we overstated the electricity consumption from those heat pumps because of kind of how people actually are behaving once they get them in, and that kind of learning gets updated over time. Like that is probably not in the current model because we're just getting those early results from our study now. But as we go forward, that's what we then incorporate.
Is that because they're using them as a supplemental heating and not primary heating? Or that's kind of
they are using them as, I think they are using them as people are using them as supplemental heating in most cases, and they're their set points maybe not as low as they can go if they're only setting them down to turn on at 30 degrees in their oil boiler to do the rest. They could, I think the assumption was that they would have the set point at 0 because they're still more efficient, and so it's kind of those behavioral actions that are causing less usage in the winter and less fossil displacement as a result.
correct.
I think they can Move to the next slide.
Okay, no, that's a good one.
Hey! That's a good slide.
Okay, so back to kind of the energy plan decision-making framework. These are, some of the criteria that we look at, and chapter 2 of the energy plan really tries to describe the analytical basis of how we think about our planning. And we think about, for example, cost effectiveness, and we don't just think about that from one perspective. We think about it from a societal perspective, including the impacts of emissions. We think about it from a Vermonter perspective. Something I've said in this committee before: how much is Vermont paying for societal impacts, and what is Vermont's direct benefit? From a program perspective, it may be that a utility is offering the program, and so they're or some subset of Vermonters. And then, of course, from the customer perspective, like what are customers who participate and customers who do not participate in the program really feeling as a result of a policy choice. We look at things like technological feasibility, and I would say program feasibility kind of falls in there as well. Like, can we actually do what we set out to do? We have a goal of, and I think it's still on the books, of 120,000 weatherizations by 2030. That is and not practically feasible, and so we need to understand that as we go forward. Equity and environmental justice, procedural equity is important, and I'll talk about this a lot more in a moment, and then also ensuring the benefits and the burdens of our policy are equitably distributed. Understanding uncertainty and risk, right? Some policies are more, we can predict the results better than others and a range of outcomes. Having milestones to understand when it's time to ensure that we're checking back and evaluating our policy. For example, our net metering policy in the mid 2010s had applied a 6-cent adder to the retail rate for net metering. And it did the intended job. It really spurred the industry and it developed a clean energy economy in Vermont that had provided a lot of benefits to Vermont. There was no check-in or way to evaluate whether that incentive was still necessary or what the appropriate level would be. And it was very challenging, as you know. Once you provide an incentive, it's hard to pull those back. And so we want to, as we go forward, make sure we're developing policy with those appropriate kind of check-ins going forward to make sure that we're saying, is this still the right path forward? Do we still need this incentive? Do we need more of an incentive? Is it doing what we intended? And then, of course, greenhouse gas emissions, which are not only a requirement of the plan, but really integral to all of our energy policy.
Yeah. You guys find it out.
We both worked on
He's close.
he is close. A couple of observation questions. One, I'm noticing that 4 of those 6 overlap with the 5 criteria that the Climate Council uses. The one that the Climate Council uses that's not there is co-benefits. And the 2 that are there that aren't Climate Council are uncertainty and policy, milestones to trigger policy shifts. So just an observation that it's great. There's a lot of overlap with the criteria. And you and I had a discussion about cost effectiveness and the statute that says sort of most cost effective, but I think we agreed that most cost effective does not mean affordable. And I wonder kind of how you balance out cost effectiveness up there. Because cost effective, the cheapest way to reduce a ton of carbon emissions, but it can still be unaffordable. How you balance cost effectiveness with affordability per se.
Yeah, so first well, I'll start with the easy one. I think some of the co-benefits can also show up in the equity and environmental justice category here. And I agree with you. Things like health benefits are not explicitly stated here, but are an important consideration. On cost effectiveness, I would say, right, that we think about cost effectiveness as I described. We quantify what we can quantify, and then think about the other pieces. And we can quantify things like the social cost of carbon with environmental damages, and include that. And the Climate Council, in my read and understanding of it, does not, the Climate Council's charge is to meet those greenhouse gas reduction requirements. And in my mind, it's without regard to cost effectiveness, except for you need to essentially rank the most cost effective way to do it. But they could all be not cost effective from any perspective. And so I think that's a really fundamental difference between the two plans. And, they're recently in some of the subcommittees that I'm aware of as counselors saying, hey, cost effectiveness is not our job. We do not look at cost effectiveness. We are looking at meeting the greenhouse gas reduction requirements of GWSA. That is really problematic, I think, for a lot of reasons, which we could get into, but maybe they're obvious. I'm not sure I answered the last part of your question, though. There was a lot of pieces to it. I think I got like 4 out of 5.
Well, I'll take this opportunity to ask a different question. But on the same subject of cost affordability and cost effectiveness, how do you balance, this thing that we've all wrestled with, which is some of this stuff costs a lot to do now, but then there are reduced costs in the future?
Oh, right. Thank you. That was the last part of your question, maybe the most important one. It is kind of I want to say that part of it is a case by case basis, that we need to look at the upfront cost impacts of something versus the long-term impacts. One of the things we've done for years in the energy efficiency world is say, here's the potential that savings we could get, and here's a reasonable path forward to get them from both a program implementation perspective, but also a rate perspective. Like, what will those rate impacts look like? And there are different times when other drivers of the economy or other factors play in, and it may allow for, in that instance, like, okay, well, we can increase the electric efficiency charge now. We know these are cost effective over the long term, but these other factors are going to Vermonters are going to feel the pain of that rate increase because the load was growing, and so it's spread out over more kilowatt hours, or other reasons that mitigate the impact of that. And we really try and balance that. And each time that I'll stick with that example of the energy setting of energy efficiency utility budgets, we look at the situation on hand and say, Vermonters can it's okay to have a little 1% increase in this charge because of those benefits. And it's really that balance. Say, what are we getting for them? in the 2000s, we really increased the efficiency charge a lot because we were specifically geo-targeting investments that we would be otherwise paying for at the time. And so, we avoided a $10 million substation by increasing the efficiency charge substantially, and that substation was like an immediate cost reduction. And so it's really the balance of all of those things.
Great, thank you.
Just one sec, sorry, and then hold that question. We always ask folks who come to committee to identify themselves, and they come in the room, members of the public.
No problem. Yeah, my name is Brian Stevenson. I'm with Vermont Public.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Onward, Rep Campbell,
I'm
Rep Southward.
okay.
Sorry, I don't know who was next, whoever.
You touched on 120,000 weatherization projects goal, and didn't seem that it was feasible. Do you attribute that to costs, workforce? What do you attribute that to?
Yes. I think a part of it is workforce for sure. Part of it is the funding to support those types of weatherizations. If we paid for 100% of every weatherization, then there would be a lot more demand for that, right? And we do that for low income, for the most vulnerable Vermonters. And I think the other piece of that is having a stable long-term funding source, so that entities who are delivering weatherization actually are certain that they will have the state support to ensure that there is demand there. If we're not going to pay 100%, that would be too expensive for a state program for every weatherization. So it's then the balance of how much do we pay and how does that drive demand going forward. And weatherization isn't sexy, right? It's not like you're going to have like a new technology to show off to your friends. You do it, you can't see it. You can feel it though. You're warmer and maybe healthier in a lot of instances, but there's a lot of different reasons for it.
Thank you.
Rep Campbell.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the cost effectiveness conversation, because I think it's really important to talk about what it is and what it isn't. Cost effectiveness is a concept we all like to sign up to, but it's actually a problematic calculation, because it requires that you predict costs in the future. We don't know what the costs in the future are. You're going to make some assumptions about that. But if you're trying to assess whether an expense today is cost effectiveness in the future, you have to define what the future is, and you have to project what those benefits will be in the future. In other words, what's the cost of fuel saving? What's the cost of fuel going to be in the future in order to assess the value of the savings of fuel by the measure that you're installing today? So that's one reason why somebody who's on the climate council might say, or who's focused on greenhouse gas emissions might say, cost effectiveness is actually not relevant to greenhouse gas emissions. We know we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so we have to do that. And we have to find, the implementers need to find the most cost effective way of doing it, that is the least cost way of doing it. But the goal is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, right? So that's one reason why people talk about it that way. Another important consideration in cost effectiveness is that there are at least two ways of looking at it. One is from the customer point of view, or the person who's paying the cost point of view, and the other is from a societal. So societal cost effectiveness is probably not relevant to the customer who's paying, but it is relevant to what incentives the public, that is the government, public funds, or what public fund, to what extent public funds support programs that help implement those savings. So I just want to, because we're sort of in a sort of foundation grounding, setting conversation here about the comprehensive energy plan. I think it's really important that we understand that cost effectiveness is in itself a problematic concept, but it's an important concept, but it's not a science. There's a lot of guessing involved in it. I just want to make that point.
Yeah, I think I would agree. There's in any forecast of the future, there's a lot of guessing involved.
It's a model. And
Right.
All models are wrong.
Yes. And yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get to with trying to look at it, things from a societal and a Vermont. And, but I do think, yeah, as problematic as it might be, it's really important to look at and to understand, who's paying and who's benefiting from each measure. And those are different under those different tests, right?
It's actually, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna add it. That's why I hope this is the next slide. Oh, it isn't. The timeline that we have. I'll go over the timeline, but we actually spent a lot of time in the climate council committees, in particular, in developing this plan because it overlapped in talking about the assumptions, what we think the business as usual is going to be, what we think, like the policy recommendations. Had Energy Futures Group did a lot of work on those and trying to setting like those policy scenarios and making those assumptions really public and I think largely consensus at the time of what we think are some reasonable scenarios for the future. Like, and by scenarios, I just mean kind of like predictions of this could happen or this other thing could happen. And are our policy choices robust under different scenario futures is the question that we can kind of answer that.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not saying we shouldn't consider both measures. I'm saying that there are ways to take it with a grain of salt. And what you're talking about is programmatic cost effectiveness, which is really important from the program point of view. What activities do we want to incentivize with public funds? But the other way that people sort of sort of seat of the pathway of thinking about it is what is most affordable for me and what's my payback. So if I invest $5,000 in a measure today, how long is it going to take for me to save that amount of money and fuel expenses? And that's a different way of looking at it. But it's again, these are valid considerations, but they're just take them with a grain of salt.
Right. And just to be clear, I'm talking about looking at them in all of those ways, from the customer perspective, from like the state of Vermont impact perspective, and from the societal perspective.
Right.
My understanding is the Climate Council says we don't need to look at any of those perspectives because the only thing that matters is reaching the goals.
And they'll be coming in so we can let them speak for themselves. I'd be much more comfortable letting them speak for themselves, I think. But this is it's a super interesting conversation and really engaging for me because to me, this gets to the absolute heart of climate work and energy work, and where we often come to loggerheads is that climate work, you have to cover an upfront cost in order to reach, in order to gain the benefits that help individuals and help society and help Vermont and help the environment. And so how do we, engage with the conversation around that upfront cost so that we can get over the hurdle and achieve all the benefits? What are we willing to pay? What can we afford to pay in order to make it worthwhile? It's what it's all about for me. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, so running out of time. You.
10:30.
You knew that.
10:30. Okay, great.
10:30
is good.
See, we did not over
Yes.
compensate.
Okay, so how is the energy plan structured? This slide probably should have come after that. That's the next one, but I'll stick with it here. We're going to have like this pyramid structure here where the foundation are those principles and goals that we talked about. We we started with the renewable targets that we had in 2016, really 90% renewable energy across all sectors by 2050. The Global Warming Solutions Act greenhouse gas reduction requirements, 30 VSA 202A, which we talked about, equity, transparency, and then the governor's priorities, affordability, economic vitality, protecting the most vulnerable. And really, that's the foundation that we start from. And then we kind of build up from there with like pathways, strategies, and recommendations. And this is a similar structure to the climate action plan as well. But and I just have some examples here of a pathway, for example, reducing usage in buildings, where then the strategy would say, hey, let's scale up weatherization, and recommendations could be several different ways to do that. Like, well, we need a on-bill financing mechanism to finance weatherization through our electric bill, which is something that has actually happened since whether it's successful or not, we can talk about. But and that's just kind of how we build those strategies. And it was important to us. Every energy plan really has a theme. And in this energy plan, we had two themes of, on one hand, equity, environmental justice. On the other hand, or parallel to that, the evolution of the grid. And I'm going to talk about those two themes a little more here in a moment. But how did we get there in terms of the process? I think we've learned a lot over the last 5 years on how to structure these plans. But it's a long process. Started in December of 2020 when we actually issue a public involvement plan, say how are we actually going to engage with the public and get feedback on that. And through January 22, a lot of stakeholder engagement around modeling, and then stakeholder groups and regional forums. We have, because we had the overlap, we had public engagement coordinated with the climate action plan, and then the draft energy plan and final plan, and comments on it and final plan. I think we've also learned from this, 14 months is actually not long enough. We're planning on, our next plan is due in January 2028, and we're planning around the end of 2025 to issue our public involvement plan for the next energy plan. So like the end of this year, maybe in January, is the target date to start this process, because we really need longer in order to engage, hear what the public says, and then have some time to write the plan based on that, not at the same time.
Yeah, thank you. I know you spent a lot of time with stakeholder engagement. You have really fine-tuned a lot of things and learned a lot. I'm just curious because, I hear so much about how people are struggling with the energy transition and trying to do the right thing in their own home. And I'm just curious whether it's possible to use those stakeholder engagement opportunities that are about planning to also capture good information from the public that can inform program design. Like, how do we leverage the fact that you just poured all this time and effort into gathering people? Is there any coordination around energy with all the various efforts?
It's a tough balance, I think, because I think program design is really challenging for everyday Vermonters to have meaningful input into, in terms of like the specifics of how you design the program. What we found was really useful when we, subsequent to this, did our electric sector engagement, was that that high level sentiment was really valuable. And what we could do is say, okay, you said you want affordability, reliability, and emissions reductions. Here's what we came up with. what do you now think of this, and have that kind of iterative process. Um, the other place, I think it's identifying barriers, and saying, why aren't you participating? Or why we have this program. Are you aware of it? Most of the time the answer is no, right? And then it's like, we have to figure out, why weren't you aware of it? Well, general public's not going to be able to answer that second question because they can't. They don't know why they weren't aware of it. So there's some challenges there for some of the specifics of the program design, but I think it's like that high level. What do you want out of a program? What do you want about your energy supply? And then we can build programs and get reactions to what we're proposing in that iterative process. I will say this did, that lower bar there, the coordination with the timing of the Climate Council. We learned a lot, as I said before, from the Just Transitions Committee. I think the Science and Data Committee, which I chaired at this time, was very helpful in getting feedback on some of the assumptions. What should we use for social cost of carbon? What should we like a discount rate, some of those assumptions that go into the cost effectiveness modeling, those things were really useful, and like a stakeholder group that was there already meeting. Where we missed are kind of community-based organizations, and that wouldn't otherwise be involved, and we're working on ways, and I think the Climate Action Office is actually doing a good job of building those relationships that we can then leverage in this energy plan going forward.
Having a moment, Act 174 is the environmental justice law, right?
No,
What was
sorry. Go ahead.
Go.
Act 174 is the Regional Planning Commission's citing.
Oh, right. Okay.
So substantial deference in Public Utility Commission proceedings. And that's Act 1. I should be more specific with the actual legislation in these slides, but it's Act 174 of 2016. The reference is on the first page. I think it's 4302. And Act 154 of 2022 was the environmental justice legislation. So that came after both of the plans were published.
Remember, we haven't done a walk through that. Our committee is not familiar with that bill, so we should act. So we should take a look. Yeah, Brett Morrow.
This is kind of a broad question, so if it's not relevant. Curious, like when I see all the climate data changing over time, like at a global level, like the IPCC data, things like that, we're already at 1.7, basically way beyond Paris. The IPCC and those other organizations seem to have underestimated pretty consistently over the decades the rising levels of greenhouse gas emissions and the impacts. Vermont and New England is warming faster than other parts of the country and the world. There's all these kind of macro and Vermont level dynamics which are shifting, but the modeling seems to have been consistently underestimating the impacts. And obviously then that has impacts on our flooding, frequency, severity, all that stuff. So in this kind of a process, are you able to, how do you interact with that kind of level of data and analysis and change? Is it even possible?
So I would say that, that's there's that uncertainty bullet on that slide, and that's one of the areas. And we, while we don't specifically in this plan, we haven't in the past specifically accounted for, the IPCC changed its model. What we do is, as we go forward, we've updated the social cost of carbon number, that the damages are higher than they were thought to be, 4 or 5 years ago, that it increased, almost doubled from what it was previously a few years ago. And so that is one way to capture that in the cost effectiveness analysis of how we look at the societal impact of our measures and doing nothing. On the other hand, it's the resilience of the grid and the resilience of our energy infrastructure and how are we adapting. Adaptation is not kind of a direct charge of the energy plan. It's more of a direct charge of the action plan, but in terms of the grid evolution, like how we think about what are the investments we need to make to ensure that we have a reliable electric supply, for example, right? And those are changing over time. We're seeing more impact of the storms. What kind of tools do we have in the toolbox in terms of weather forecasting, understanding in a really granular, like 5 kilometer or 5 mile by 5 mile grid of what do we expect the climate impacts to be here? What infrastructure do we have here? Where do we direct our limited funds where it will have the most value going forward? And so those types of planning decisions are a little more dynamic, but we don't necessarily say, well, the IPC said this. We kind of just take that and then go from there. We don't do a sensitivity on the scientists.
Okay, that's helpful. Very good.
Yeah, I'm sorry. All right, now we're doing our thing. How many more pages do we have?
I think I had 15 slides here, so
Okay,
I'm
that's all right.
fine.
It's okay.
So we're,
Everything's still fine.
yeah, we're good. Okay, so I've talked about this quite a bit already. Equity is really a key theme of the plan, and really grounds the energy plan, core concepts and guiding principles throughout sectoral chapters. So the plan structure, a chapter on electricity, transportation, thermal usage, and where it's relevant, these considerations come in. And this really includes that equity should be considered as a core decision-making criteria. So you saw it on the slide previously, which was not previously the case. At the Public Service Department, we, as in our role as a ratepayer advocate, we kind of feel like and have felt like we've worn that hat of advocating for all Vermonters and ratepayers and on a low income, on an income basis. But this is really broader and takes a broader step, looks at is more geographically diverse, racially diverse, and looking at all the kind of demographics that we really should look at. So in the plan, we suggest that having a more equitable energy system is going to require more holistic appraisal of the context in which those programs and policies operate, and including whether they perpetuate inequities or create them. And then also really looking at procedural equity in terms of developing a more equitable public process that allows more Vermonters to participate in the decision-making process. So like making policy for Vermonters with Vermonters. In terms of grid evolution, the plan recognizes that the move away from fossil fuels is going to require electrification. At the exact level we'll figure out, but that also comes with increasing amounts of distributed energy resources. That's both generating resources and load resources, like the ability to flex the load and have it show up when the generation is operating, and all of those connecting to the electric grid. And so, obviously we're talking about the heat pumps, we're talking about EVs and other technologies that produce the services that we actually want. We'll do that affordably and in clean manner. And then we're talking about the visibility of those loads for utilities through sensors and metering to the orchestration of those resources to match supply and demand. The energy plan doesn't have like a stepwise plan for Vermont to reinvent its grid. It's not a grid modernization plan that would have probably been outdated by now, but it's really a vision and set of principles for consideration in our policy, regulatory, and other venues to help future-proof our decision making around these long-lived investments, right? A substation of wires and poles really last for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. That involves taking advantage of the headroom that we already have on the grid to add more resources and being really strategic about any additional grid investments that are borne by Vermonters. Those are major cost drivers bills. And I will just mention that the department recently petitioned the Public Utility Commission to open a resilience proceeding. So a proceeding to really understand how, like what we should target for resilience and reliability, what metrics we should track, what granularity we should track them, what tools are available for utilities to do, how ubiquitous it needs to be across our 17 different utilities, and how to structure incentives to drive the performance that we want. And so, and all of that will lead to better understanding what investments are necessary, and from a resilience and reliability perspective. So we're really looking forward to that proceeding. We actually have one of the national labs to help us with best practices across the country, and that proceeding should hopefully kick off in the next month or so.
Oh, yeah, that was my question. How long do you think that'll be? A year, 18 months, something like that?
I think probably about 12 months. It may be able to get some early learnings earlier than that. That'll be useful for utility investments, but I could see that proceeding taking a year or so. Yeah. Okay, so the rest of these slides are just kind of a summary of the actual pathways and recommend some of the strategies in each sector that are in the energy plan. And then I don't have a slide for it, but I do have some notes to talk about 289 and how it fits into everything we've talked about here. So specifically on the electric sector, the goal was for 100% carbon-free electricity by 2032. The pathway was for a comprehensive, in the energy plan, we called for it to be the Public Utility Commission review of renewable energy standard design and complementary programs like the net metering program, what to do with standard offer program, et cetera, community solar. Ultimately, the department did that comprehensive review through our engagement process that I've talked about it several times. And the legislature acted last year. And it was not, we didn't, how should I phrase this? Well, I'll just say H289 reiterates the proposal that the department made last year with following our public engagement process in order to better align our renewable procurement and clean energy procurement strategies with the energy plan and what we heard from the public. Underneath that broad pathway, we did talk about the need to better match supply and demand, right? A lot of our local supply is happening in the spring, whereas more load is happening in the winter, the electric vehicle demand and heat pumps, even though it's less than we thought. Still more demand in the winter. How we think about new versus existing generation, and where, discussions on in-state, out-of-state, where. In the thermal sector, we had a goal to increase renewable supply by the percentages you see here, with two pathways to do that. One is to reduce energy demand, weatherization at scale. I will say that 120,000 unit goal that was developed in my understanding is nobody actually knows where that number came from. It goes back as far as like 2012, 13, I think, when there was a thermal efficiency task force report. I think last year at some point I looked through some of the old materials of that to try and find where 120,000 units came from. And it just kind of materialized.
I think it was 80,000 back in 2010 or 12 or so. And I don't know, people thought, oh, we should make it more. So,
Right.
Somewhere later.
Right. Under that, reducing energy demand, it's weatherization, it's efficient buildings. So new buildings, let's go building them so that we don't have to go back and weatherize them after. And then opportunities for our state energy management program, like our leading by example, our own buildings as a state. And then low carbon technology choices. The plan did talk about considering a clean heat standard. This was actually one of the bigger differences between the energy plan and the climate action plan, where the energy plan said, hey, let's consider a clean heat standard. There's a lot we don't know about how the market might be affected, and what this might mean for Vermonters and for society. Let's study it. And then the climate action plan said, let's do it without that study first. And then you all know the history from there. Supporting clean fuels and technology, from the cold climate and ground source heat pumps to advanced water heat and district heat, biofuels and renewable natural gas. I think Vermont Gas, could hear from them, but I think they're up to about 3.5% of their supply is from renewable natural gas. And the way the greenhouse gas inventory counts that is zero emissions. And then on transportation, 2 slides on transportation here, having aligning our greenhouse gas reductions proportional to the Global Warming Solutions Act and 100% light duty. That's what LD stands for, light duty vehicle sales by 2035. I'll start on the right side this time, the cleaner vehicles that California, the Agency of Natural Resources, adopted the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulations, which does require 100% of the vehicles sold. 100% of vehicles, the amount of vehicles sold in 2035 to have that many available that are 100% zero emission vehicles. And in Vermont or across the states that comply with the regulations. Really continuing to look at the regional discussions of federal emissions and fuel economy standards. And on the left-hand side, really supporting vehicle electrification, whether it's electric vehicle charging stations, rate design and load control. All of our utilities have electric vehicle rates or plans to implement them as the advanced metering infrastructure catches up and the rate designs, cost of service studies catch up. Other programs like incentive programs through our tier 3 programs or other agency of transportation programs. The other side of the transportation sector is really our mobility and our land use planning. So system efficiency via land use settlement patterns. This is a tough one because these impacts take decades to show up, right? And I think Representative Campbell, to your point earlier, how do we invest in this when we don't see any payoff for 30 years, right? But it's really trying to put the systems in place to allow those to happen. And the Agency of Transportation and ACCD could speak more eloquently about these than I can. But really integrating the land use planning into decision-making frameworks on the transportation sector. Think of some complete streets program, support for compact development, smart growth designation programs. I think those are both ACCD programs. And then on the right-hand side here, increasing our transportation or maintaining our transportation choices, whether it is public transit or rail or biking and walking, and just continuing to encourage those alternatives to single occupancy vehicles. Okay, well, I blew through those slides, which is good because now it's about 12 minutes for, and that's probably the right timing. Stop sharing my screen here. Okay, so no slides for this part. So H289, you all have. I think that how it relates. I'm not going to speak to specifics of the bill really, although we can get into that. Although things like the electric sector components, where the department is really very directly involved, I think probably could deserve like a longer walk through it another time. So I think that as it relates to the energy plan, H289 provides the opportunity to evaluate and prioritize considering both the Vermont and societal impacts of our policies, including cost. And that's through the development of an actual implementation plan. And that's consistent with the decision-making framework that is in the energy plan. So I think one of the things that maybe gets overlooked when that's the wrong word, but the energy plan and the climate action plan kind of set out those broad strategies, a vision, broad strategies, some pathways, and like some specific recommendations, but it's not. Neither of them right now are kind of a step-by-step implementation plan, right? They're not saying, well, these will cost this much and we're going to do this first and this at the same time because it has long-term impacts, but we need to get started. And then next we will do this, next we will do this, and here's what it costs. Neither of those plans actually get to that, I think. And so H289 provides the opportunity and calls for a specific implementation plan that will get there. In terms of the equity theme of the energy plan, said the energy plan attempted to center equity and environmental justice in its recommendations. I think where this most shows up, and I can speak to it the most, is our electric sector recommendations. Our proposal for the Renewable Energy for Communities programs seeks to directly send benefits to communities, and really importantly, it also pays for it. And so that really helps to seek Vermonters' affordability, including who knows who need it most, but also looks at the distribution of the benefits, saying we need to bring more benefits to those who need it most, and the burdens of the policy, saying, hey, we can actually lower the cost of our other policies in order to redistribute here. And so nobody is harmed because we're paying for it through the policy. And I will circle back again. I undertook what I think was largely unprecedented for the department and maybe in the energy space at the time, that engagement effort, and found that affordability and reliability were main concerns, and emissions were right up there as well. And so we think that this, on the electric sector in particular, really balances those. We actually, our proposal goes faster as far as the greenhouse gas inventory is concerned in terms of reducing our electric sector emissions than what is here now, and it does it at lower cost and better distributing the benefits. Specific to different sectors here. Our electric sector, I guess I just talked about carbon-free electricity that's consistent with both the energy plan and the climate action plan for that matter. Weatherization is identified in our energy plan as a critical need. H289 finds a way to ensure that weatherization funding from our federal sources doesn't fall off a cliff, and funds weatherization for several more years, keeping the workforce in Vermont ready to go as we develop that implementation plan and a commitment to pursuing a long-term funding source. Looked like somebody had a question.
Rep Campbell does, but we don't want to, yeah.
I don't want to, if you.
Okay,
wanna wrap up.
two more points, and then I'll just go through on the transportation sector. We continue to find support for electric vehicle incentives, similar to weatherization, so that funding does not fall off a cliff, and continue to encourage support for electrification. And then I'll end on accountability, which I mentioned before. The energy plan's accountability lies in elections. And as we've learned since November, both federally and locally, elections have consequences, right? And H289 addresses accountability and puts it back in the hands of the administration in terms of the proposed changes to the structure of the climate council. So I will stop there. That was kind of the overview of how I saw the plan kind of pursuing what is recommended in the energy plan. Sorry, H289 pursuing what's recommended in the energy plan, and happy to talk about details of specific proposals, that especially the ones that relate to the department.
Great. Rep Campbell.
Sure. So I was thinking back to your slide that showed the different things, in particular the one about triggering certain policy adjustments, goals triggering a policy adjustment. So the H289 says we want to shift the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act to goals, back to goals. And I guess my question here is, what specific triggers or what specific policies would the administration support being triggered by if we don't make those goals? That's not something you can answer right now, but it's something for you and the department and office and A&R to think about. If those requirements were moved to goals, what specific policy would be triggered by missing those goals? So that's one thing I'm curious about. And another thing about shifting from renewable energy requirements to clean energy requirements. So this obviously pertains to including nuclear power into the mix. Can you talk about, can you quantify that? You know, how did the department see nuclear power adding into the mix? What proportion? Is there new nuclear contemplated in order to make this work? Just can you talk about that?
Yeah. First, thank you for the suggestion on the milestones. I will think about that and take you up on the offer not to talk about it right now. On nuclear, I think that initially the policy just recognizes that 18% of our portfolio in 2023 came from nuclear before we count for renewable energy credits. We have contracts with Seabrook and a small ownership share in the Millstone plant in Connecticut for nuclear energy. And our renewable energy standard basically requires us to pretend that those don't exist and say we have to then purchase renewable energy attributes from existing resources, so from hydro, just to kind of cover up what our portfolio looks like. And initially the bulk of those contracts go through 2034. And so initially, it's a pretty easy calculation on what the cost of that policy is. We have these nuclear projects, nuclear contracts now, and we need to purchase renewable energy credits at currently they're roughly $4 a megawatt hour, and it's roughly 1 million megawatt hours. So $4 million a year needs to be spent from 2030 through 2034 to cover up those the nuclear in our portfolio. And that's step one. It's as simple as that. Secondly, the nuclear resources are currently a critical component of the regional grids generation. They're non-emitting at the point of combustion, right? And they are already existing. New England states are actively looking at ways to keep those units online past their current licenses. So Massachusetts last year passed legislation to allow their energy office to enter into contracts with existing plants that goes beyond their current contracts. Connecticut has similar legislation. Connecticut has a clean energy. Connecticut has their portfolio standard has a provision for clean energy that allows new nuclear to be included in it. Massachusetts has a clean energy standard that allows existing nuclear to count. That new nuclear is pointed at kind of advanced small modular reactors, so really small scale reactors that are in reality 5 to 10 years away at least from actually fruition or becoming real if they ever do. But what their policy does is open the door for those to allow for developers or companies that might be interested to say, hey, this is a market that we want to locate these. Maine State Energy Office has supported nuclear. New Hampshire has a change in administration. They're I think agnostic right now is what they reported to me, their state energy office, but have said kind of supportive things. And there is a bunch of legislation pending. It's where it is in their process, I'm not sure, but that would specifically support nuclear. So all that's to say is that nuclear is in New England now. It is part of our current portfolio and in our contracts and ownership shares for the next 10 years. And we could just recognize that fact and not kind of play the renewable energy credit game to kind of cover that up and save money for ratepayers.
Okay, so just to be specific, so what you were contemplating, what the department was contemplating was just maintaining existing nuclear, not building new.
Yeah, I think correct. Although the way that we've written the legislation, it would, if advanced small nuclear reactors were available and safe, and the legislation would allow for those to count as well. So,
yeah, thanks.
All right. That was a really interesting conversation. I think that we are out of time. I wonder if folks would be okay with a 5-minute break. Jane, is that okay with you? Of course. Okay. TJ, thanks so much for being here. Jack, I think we should probably adjourn, go off live, and let's all try to be